Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue on our class research methods. So, first of all, congratulations again on exam one. Excellent performance. Uh, well, but that's only our first exam, and there are many more assessments coming up, including two more exams and a whole bunch of homework assignments. So there are still many points to earn and many points to lose. The general principle, of course, is to earn as many points as possible and don't lose easy points. Okay? All right, so starting from today, we'll be talking about specific methods of data collection. And we'll start with surveys. So it's always a good idea to have a clear vision of, where we are, right? We can't just talk about specifics all the time, but we also know why we're doing that, the motivation behind the topics. So if we're talking about, scientific research or doing scientific research, the usual starting point is a puzzle. For example, you might ask, well, why some people are against legalizing marijuana use, whereas others are pretty much okay with it, if not, favoring the idea. So that's a puzzle, right? Um, in order to study this puzzle scientifically, instead of using just speculations or making wild guesses, um, we rely on theories and hypotheses, right? Because theories and hypotheses can guide our thinking. It's like a torch, right? Or flashlight, as Americans will call it. They can sort of direct our attention in darkness. Okay? But, in order to talk about theories and hypotheses, we need concepts and constructs because theories and hypotheses are constructed with concepts and constructs, right? Concepts and constructs are like building blocks, without which there are no theories or hypotheses. So for this course, we will not talk about theories and hypotheses because we have COMG 301, right? It's a theory class. So you guys will learn more about theories in that class, but not here. Okay, so in the previous class, well, a week or 2 weeks actually, um, we have been talking about concepts and constructs. What are they? And of course, we also talked about in previous classes, how do we measure concepts and constructs? Um, and we call this activity of measurement um, operationalization. Well, I mean, more precisely, operationalization is a um, larger class of activities that include measurement, right? But we know that, well, to suffice the purpose of this lecture, this class, all we need to know is that measurement is part of operationalization. But you might wonder, what will come after, right? Once we have established um, our plan or plans of measuring variables as well as, established the reliability and validity of our measurements, right? That is, after ensuring that our measurements are of good quality, then what next? Well, that's what's going to happen in the next step. That is, we're now ready to collect data, right? Either in a lab situation or to go out in the real world, so to speak, right, to collect people's responses. Okay, so this step is to clear up our thinking. This step is to prepare ourselves with the tools, right? To sharpen the tools, to get ready with the tools, and now we're ready to act, right? So after that, let's have a brief preview. After we collect some data, numbers, and other types of information that can be quantified, we'll be ready to examine or test whether our hypotheses formed or formulated at this stage is correct or not, right? So at this stage, we'll be talking about quite a bit of statistics, which is of great fun. Well, at least that's, my impression and intention, right, to make it fun. But anyway, so this week we'll be talking about methods of collecting data. And we'll spend the rest of the class talking about the many different ways of examining hypotheses, and mostly that involves with playing with numbers. Okay, should be fun. All right, so methods of data collection. As we said, because our focus of this class is on quantitative research, there are two major types of data collection methods we will be looking at, and these two major types of data collection methods are surveys. So surveys, there are some very good features about surveys, why surveys are useful, in other words. The first advantage or usefulness of conducting survey research is that surveys are very good at describing patterns. By patterns, we mean, you know, regularities, right? Things that we expect to occur with a certain feature that can be repeated, right? Um, Opinion polls, for example, is a very common type of survey, right? You and we actually often hear people say that 99, not 99, but the support rate of for uh, Hillary Clinton is this much percent, and the support rate for Trump is this much, this many percentage. So those are describing patterns, right? They're excuse me, there are these people who are firm supporters of a particular candidate, right? Or we hear about um, percentages about supporting various kinds of socio-political issues, and of course those are patterns as well, right? Another you know um, advantage of conducting survey is beyond describing patterns, but it starts to look at how two variables are related to each other. For example, to return to the question that we asked earlier on, is why people have different views on legalizing marijuana use. Well, you might suspect that it's because they have different political ideologies. Some are generally more conservative, whereas others are more liberal. And you might expect, therefore, there will be a correlation between political ideology and people's views on legalizing marijuana use. All right? You might expect that as people become more and more liberal, they will be more supportive of uh, legalizing marijuana use. Whereas if people are more conservative, they should be you know um, less supportive, or oppose more the idea to make marijuana legal. So that's what we mean by establishing correlations. Um, the last feature of conducting good survey research is we can make our results generalizable. that means we can make larger claims. We can make claims that are beyond what we got from this survey. Right? We'll talk about this issue of generalizability later on, but later on we shall see that this is a very, very important feature of survey studies. The second major type of data collection for quantitative research is experiment. Experiment is a very, very useful type of method, just as important as surveys, right? There are no worse or better methods. They're equally important and they achieve different goals. And perhaps the most important advantage or reason why people care about doing experiment is because experiment is the only method that can establish causality, right? That is, provided it is properly designed and conducted. So remember that we have a question on our first exam on, okay, I probably should not say this because there's still one classmate who have not taken exam yet. But anyway, right? So later on we shall discuss, the critical differences between surveys and experiments other than their own important features. Okay? All right, let's start with survey. Imagine this is a piece of paper on which you will print questions for your survey studies. Okay? Let's get this guy out of the way. For example, right, to use our favorite example, um, people's views on legalizing marijuana use. So you might simply ask people, hey, do you mind telling me or telling us your attitude toward this particular issue, right? So we know that, this is a 7-point scale and we're treating this variable attitude toward legalizing marijuana use, right? This is a variable because people will start to assign different values to this variable, to this concept, okay? And we treat it as sort of a continuous variable, and we are using an interval scale. And we think that this could be a valid measure because, this is exactly asking what we intend to ask. So at least this question is face valid, right? It's a face valid measure of our intended variable or our intended concept, that is people's views on legalizing marijuana use. All right, so let's say this is our, the variable that we're interested in. And then usually in a very typical survey, right, we will see these kinds of questions. And these questions are what we call demographics or demographic questions. That is to gather some basic information about a particular respondent. Of course, usually we don't collect people's names, IDs, or any personally identifying information, just to maintain the uh, anonymity of their responses. Right? That's a very important. I shouldn't say pretty, but very important um, requirement in terms of the ethics of doing research. But these information is okay to provide because by none of these information is can allow us to establish a link between the true identity of a person and his or her responses. Okay, we know a person is male, but that's all of it. We don't know who this male is. Okay, all right. So we'll say that this is a very perhaps the most basic form of survey study. We have a core question that measures of that measures the outcome variable. Right? Remember predictors, outcomes, right? So this will be our outcome variable because this is the variable that we try to explain. Okay, and then we have some demographic variables that will allow us to describe some general patterns. For example, we can describe, 90%, well, actually it's 90, but X% of males support this, whereas X%, Y% of females support this issue, etc. Or, you know, simply reporting, you know, among or of the 1,000 people that I surveyed, 60% of people are against or for this issue, whereas the rest is, um, are holding the opposite opinion, etc. Right? So that will allow us to describe general patterns. But um, beyond general describing general patterns, we can already start to establishing correlations because now we have one variable. This is second variable, right? A third variable and a fourth variable. So are these variables? And this is obviously a categorical variable, right? Because the values of this variable is discrete. And then we have another continuous variable, age. That's a classic continuous variable, and this measure is a ratio measure because it has, first of all, equal intervals. You know, age 1, the difference between age 1 and 2 is the same as difference as between age 5 and age 6. And it has a true zero, right? Well, more or less we'll say it's a true zero because it really means it's the starting point, right? So we sort of more or less treat it as a ratio or a true zero. But of course, you can argue that zero does not really mean the absence of age. It still has age, but this age is zero. Well, it gets a little bit philosophical, but never mind, right? This is either an interval or ratio. Doesn't matter too much, and this is another categorical variable because it doesn't denote any ranking, right? It only denotes that these categories are different, right? Of course, you can choose more than one, but that's okay because some people are indeed of mixed ethnicity or racial categories. Um, but then the important point is there's no overlap, right? African Americans do not overlap with Indians, American Indians, and Asian Americans do not overlap with Hispanics, etc. Okay. See, everything connects, right? Where the lectures from previous weeks are indeed useful in helping us understand what we're doing right now. Okay, so for example, because we have more than one variables, we can start to correlate things. For example, we can see whether gender correlates with um, attitudes toward marijuana use. For example, we can ask, well, are men generally more supportive of legalizing marijuana use, or are younger people, of course not very young, but young adults, more likely to be supportive of legalizing marijuana use than older people, right? Or which ethnic group is most or least supportive of legalizing marijuana use, right? So these are interesting questions, and by gathering people's information, right, their values, we can start to answer all these questions. Okay, good. Um, but now if our hypothesis, let's say our guess is, in general, the reason that people are uh, having all these different views on legalizing marijuana use is because they hold different political ideologies. If that's your guess, then you better measure people's political ideology, right? Because if you do not include a question, in this questionnaire, you will not be able to know people's ideologies, right? So the best way to know about a people's ideology is to simply ask them, right? circle number that represents your ideology here. Okay, so now we can start to use variables other than demographic variables as the predictors. We can use this as a predictor variable to predict people's views on legalizing marijuana use. Okay, um, so even to make our survey even more complicated, right? We can start to include um, more than one predictive variables, right? We can include people's mother's political ideology, right? Their family, sort of their family ideology, or their father's ideology as well. And we can also sort of, out of curiosity or for any purposes, we can see whether or not people's preference for different types of computers might have any kind of association with their intention or attitude toward legalizing marijuana use. Okay? Actually, there's good reason to expect that people's preference for PC or Mac would relate to people's attitude toward legalizing marijuana use. And this is because, in general, people who are more liberal are more likely to use Mac. Comparatively, PC users are generally more conservative, not like very conservative, but more conservative than Mac users. And if it is the case that, you know, it is, conservatism that underlies people's views on legalizing marijuana use, then there might be some difference between PC users and Mac users in terms of the views on this issue. Right? That will be a very interesting sort of study to conduct to find out whether that's true or not. Okay, so by including all these additional questions, we can now start to establish what we call multivariate relationships. So multi means many, right? Variate simply means variables. So that means the relationships between many, more than two variables, right? We recall that the correlation between two variables is called bivariate, right? Bi means two, variate means variables, right? Relationship between two variables. Here is relationship between multiple variables or multivariate relationships. Okay? Okay, so, well, this is sort of masked by my drawing here, but it's correlation among multiple variables. Okay, so to further understand survey research, we should learn about several terminologies or jargons, as you call it. The first one is deceivably simple questionnaire. But the point I would like to emphasize with regard to questionnaire, this particular term or concept, is that questionnaires are a tool or an instrument. It is an instrument in a sense as a ruler or a hammer is an instrument, right? They're tools. They're tools that we use to achieve certain purposes. Excuse me. So, in the future, after this particular lecture, you should not be calling questionnaires a method, right? Um, it's not the same thing as a survey. So if someone asks you, "Oh, what did you just do?" you cannot say that I just participated in a questionnaire study. that would not make any sense, because questionnaires is a tool, right? We don't use a tool to describe a method, right? Survey is a method. Survey is a method of data collection. But questionnaire is only a tool that survey will use to gather data. Okay, see the difference here? Survey is a method, a way of doing things, right? But in order to achieve what surveys are intended to achieve, we need questionnaires as a tool, as an instrument, right?